Hi everyone, today I'm with Luke Eaton and we'll be talking about Recruiting Operations 101. So what's recruiting operations, why it's useful, how to implement recruiting operations and why it's important. We'll cover all these topics today with you, Luke. Thanks a lot for joining me. We had a very pleasant conversation to prepare that episode, so I'm very much looking forward to it. And I also add the link to your article and the reason why I reached out in the first place, the Recruitment Operations 101 article that you posted on LinkedIn. So I'll put the link in the description. So that being said, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit more about yourself, your experience about Seed, and about why you're so passionate about recruiting operations.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me onto the podcast. It's I really enjoy your work and all the conversation we had. My name's Luke, and I'm with a company called Seed just now. So I'm a recruitment leader within Seed, and what we do is we embed into venture-backed organizations that are going through their seed to Series A or Series A to Series B round, and they're going through a period of hyperscale. They have everything except for the people ops function. So we act as a people ops in a box solution for those organizations. We embed a whole team. We're there for a year to 2 years or more. And my role is to act as essentially a de facto head of TA for that company during that tricky period. So setting up all the systems, the tools, best practices, the workforce planning, and actually helping them achieve the hiring targets that they need to realize their investments and the value of the investment. So that's essentially what I'm doing just now. My background's always been in recruitment for the past 12 years, always in hyperscale tech. Before then, I was actually a magician for 10 years, if you can believe that. Before then, I was a croupier in a casino, and before then, I was a window cleaner. So I've had a very varied career history before I got to recruitment.
How did you get into recruiting in the first place?
Oh, just the standard way that everyone gets into recruitment, drop out of college and get into recruitment. No, it's the old joke. No, it was just something that, like a lot of people, just fell into. And I, based on the fact that I was emotionally intelligent, I liked to have a chat, I was curious, and I went into agency. So I started in agency in tech. I specialized in DevOps, and the DevOps and infrastructure space was my own domain. And then I went internal with a hyper-growing tech company just out of pure chance. It was a very culturally led, hyper-scaling business. I had no idea what any of that meant when I joined that company. But by the end, I'd taken that company from about 100 people to about 1,300 people before they got acquired by Blackstone. And then I moved into Seed to essentially do that over and over again with different customers. So very challenging work, but always good fun.
And when we talked yesterday, you mentioned about how engineering and DevOps involved to include manufacturing best practices, and how that could or could not happen to recruiting as well. And that's my understanding is that's the basics of recruiting operations, right? So can you tell us a bit more about what's recruiting operations to you, and the connection with the potential evolution of the role of recruiters?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is really what is my preoccupation just now outside of the day-to-day of my work is how I want to develop my own knowledge in the business is, recruitment operations in general is seen as just, I think now as the tools required to go about recruitment in a business and the common best practices. But from the challenges that I've seen, if I could make a list of the challenges that exist across all of the customers that I've worked with from Series A, or if they're in Series B or larger, a lot of the same problems come about. And a lot of the problems are due to an inability to properly map and engage with recruitment data and use that data to pull out accurate insights and make decisions and communicate those decisions in an effective way to leadership. I think there's plenty of podcasts in recruitment that talk about should recruitment be a strategic function? Well, I think the answer that everyone says is yes. But the question is really, well, are recruiters ready to sit there and talk to CEOs in a strategic way? And I believe we aren't. I believe that recruitment operations hasn't evolved enough to be up there with the head of BI and data or the COO or the business analysts and the data analysts that help the CEOs, and the CEOs make accurate decisions. And that's where I think recruitment needs to evolve. Luckily, recruitment is a process. And like lots of other processes, the same methodologies hold fast. So the article that I wrote, Recruiting Rec Ops 101, was an attempt to show all of the core components, measures, and concepts in recruitment. Let's get some common definitions going, and let's link to some concepts that are used in other sectors that we know work on processes. So as you mentioned, manufacturing used lean concepts and the theory of constraints to identify bottlenecks. That's 60 years old in manufacturing. If you want to make a car, they've been doing it this way for 60 years. 20 years ago, software developers started doing it when it came to software releases, increased the cadence of the way that they release software by identifying bottlenecks in the process. And now it's 20 years old. Well, recruitment hasn't had that moment yet, where the way we go about recruitment is fundamentally data driven. And that's what I find really exciting right now for us, for our generation of recruiters, because we can do away with the old paradigm, and we can be the people who kind of bring that new way of recruiting into the mainstream. But I think the challenges are very much our relationship with data. I think one of the things we got a really good discussion about yesterday, was the way recruiters enter the field. The way I enter the field is the way most recruiters enter the field, right? Through an agency. And what is data to you when you're in your first 6 months of recruitment? It's an arbitrary KPI, right? It's top down. 10 before 10 BD calls, 100 reach out. Why? Don't worry about that. Just do your 100 reach out, or you don't pass your probation. We've all been in those environments before. So oftentimes, data to recruiters is kind of like a weapon. It's kind of like a club that they're hit over the head with managers. Do your 10 before 10. So I think a lot of recruiters can end up with a very negative or toxic relationship with recruitment data. And I think it's our role as leaders in recruitment, if we want that future that I've been banging on about, to kind of rehabilitate recruitment data's relationship with recruiters and teach them that it's a way of empowering the recruiter to have a better work-life balance, to be able to do more, add more value with the same level of effort, or for the same value and level of effort, have more time to yourself, go pick your kids up from school. And unless they can use their data to analyze where am I best placed, where's my work and my effort and my labor best place, that sliding scale between work and life isn't in their hands. They're not in control of it. So as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about this. I could talk for the next 2 hours about it, but that's my fundamental preoccupation just now.
All right. So what you're saying basically is that a lot of recruiters feel overwhelmed, not in control of their time, not in control of their calendar, because they don't use enough these manufacturing concepts and have no control around their production line. So they're supposed to churn out hires, but have absolutely no control to what's happening before churning out hires. That's also the reason why they're not considered strategic enough. And that change can happen. People can, that change can happen, but it also can not happen, right? People have to drive that change, have to use more and more data, and make the recruitment function evolve.
Yeah, that's why it's so exciting, is that we are on that knife edge. We are on that sort of tightrope, where it is on us, on this generation, to really put a lot of effort into learning about data. But when I look around, I don't see many places to do that learning, which is why I see a small number of voices, yours included, who are very strong proponents of this type of recruitment operations. Like, as an example, to give this a bit more, to make this a bit more tangible, one of the favorite things in my job to do, it usually happens once every 6 months to a year, is I'm pulled into a conversation with an angry CEO, or a CEO who wants more hires. So let's say there was supposed to be 20 hires, or there was some quarterly target, and instead of 20 hires that we're forecasting, there's going to be about 10 hires. And the request is always the same, right? Do more. How can we get recruiters to do more? Do we need to hire more recruiters? Can we get them to reach out to more people? Can we buy a tool or a system that will allow us to reach out to more? And what I often have to say to those people in that scenario is that actually what we're going to do is half as much, and that's going to get us more hires. So I'm making the case for our recruiters to do less, and that's what's going to solve their problem. Now, if you don't have data at your back when you say that to a CEO, it's going to be a very short meeting. Right? You need to arm yourself with data, and the reason it's what I'm saying is true is because we're measuring volume very well. What can a recruiter do? We would measure conversion very well because it's a function of volume, right? So what's the pass through? But what we're not very good at is measuring capacity at every stage. There's kind of 3 cardinal axes to actually measuring the process, and one of them is capacity. And that's a really massive oversight for recruitment, because all bottlenecks in any process, they're defined by capacity. They're capacity problems. So let's look at a thought experiment. Imagine, and this is in the article as well, if people want to read it. Imagine you have a technical interview stage, okay? And your recruiters are producing enough volume to, let's say they're producing 6 candidates per week at that interview stage. So let's say it's an evergreen software development role for some hyperscaling business. So there's always an ever-present need for this role. So they're producing 6 candidates at the technical interview stage per week, but we only have the capacity to facilitate 4 a week. So let's say there's 2 interviewers who are doing 2 slots. Well, that's a pretty important bottleneck and very common one. What's going to happen there? What's the impact of that bottleneck? Well, every week there's going to be 2 candidates who have to be scheduled in the following week. Well, what does that do to the bottleneck of the following week? You only have 2 effective slots now, and you're putting in 6 candidates, which means you've filled up the following week. And the time to offer and the time in stage for that candidate increases. Well, we all know what happened. We all know about that, right? What's going to happen then? The candidate experience drops. The conversion drops because people are dropping out to your competitors. Well, if the conversion drops, the level of effort goes up. So it takes more interviews to make a hire. What do recruiters have to do? They have to do more recruitment to fill the same number of hires. And of course, if the level of effort goes up, then the cost per hire goes up. So you've got, let's say an extra interview that you need to take to make 1 hire. If you times that by, say, 250 in a hyperscaling business, that is potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of waste that isn't even being tracked in most businesses. It's big, right? So recruiters have to be really good at seeing bottlenecks in data and understanding how to elevate those bottlenecks and how to mitigate the impact of the bottlenecks. But more importantly, how to even just communicate that in a data-driven way to a strategic leader. So hopefully that illustrates, like, as just a basic example of how a bottleneck can cause, a massive problem in a scaling business.
So what you're saying here is, instead of producing 6 candidates per week, recruiters could produce 4. Each candidate has an interview in the following week. The candidate experience increases, time to hire decreases, cost per hire decreases as well. Everybody's happier, and the recruiters have to work 30% less. And this extra 30% that they get, they can probably invest it in the candidate experience, following up with candidates, improving the conversion rates, maybe trying to free up more space for more slots for interviews. So that will be maybe lobbying the company to find more people to take on the interviews, or train people to take the interviews. And working less will paradoxically increase the output, because we just and that's a very core manufacturing concept as well. An entire system just produces as much as the bottleneck. So even if you increase the input, but there's a bottleneck, the output will just always be limited to the bottleneck. And we never think about this in recruiting, especially as there's this opposition between recruiters and managers, hiring managers, be it internal in-house recruiters or agencies. There's the same, right? So you get a lot of candidates, send them to your clients or to the hiring managers. and they just don't review the resumes, or they just don't have enough time to take the interviews. So all this work is wasted, right?
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it. And the big saving in the recruitment function is that time that the recruiters save. So if we can calculate, and we can, how much volume it takes to produce 4 candidates at the tech stage, then that's the minimum amount of effort to produce the same number of hires. If we produce 250,000 screens in a week, we're getting 4 interviews, and let's say that goes through to 1 hire. If it's 1 million, it's 1 hire. So you figuring out the minimum amount of volume that your recruiters need to achieve that outcome saves up all that time. And as you say, the first place our recruiters want to look is elevating the bottleneck. So in this case, increasing capacity, onboarding more interviews. If that's not possible, then mitigating the bottleneck is possible. It is possible. So if you are going to throttle volume, you don't just say, well, take Wednesday off, guys. You don't have to do that. Why not use much higher success criteria to naturally throttle volume? Maybe a DNI sprint, so to build more diverse teams. Well, doing a DNI sprint is going to add extra value to the candidate pool, because we're building a more diverse candidate pool, and at the same time, it throttles volume to meet the bottleneck. So you can kill two birds with one stone almost. Or maybe a very specific marketplace that you're going to look for candidates. Some way of reducing the candidate pool to the point where the volume comes down in a way that adds extra value. Or it could just be more value-adding tasks. But also, imagine you have a budget as a recruiter, and you're trying to talk about cost per hire, or you're trying to calculate accurately cost per hire, but you have no way of telling how efficient your recruiters are. So the effort that they're putting in right now is essentially a full week's worth of recruitment. If you don't know how much of that recruitment equates to hires and how much of it is junk volume, then you can't calculate cost per hire accurately, which again is a pretty huge problem in a scaling business. I always liken it to an analogy of buying a new car. If you bought a new car based on the hope that it hit sort of X miles per gallon, but then you bought the car and then you threw in the trunk like an indeterminate amount of bowling balls, and then just took some of the air out of a few of the wheels for no apparent reason, you can't accurately say that you're going to get that miles per gallon, because you just don't know how the car's going to function. So yeah, how much of a recruited week is value adding and how much is junk, and how can a recruitment manager mitigate that is quite important.
All right. So by now, and people will listen, A players are probably already convinced of the importance of keeping track of data, of being more data driven, of bringing data to the table when talking to the exec team. Now, the question that I always get is, how do I get started? Right. So I know that's important. I know I'd love to be like Luke and be able to say, well, listen, we're to produce more hires. Well, actually, we won't hire more people, or we won't be working 30% more, but we'll do the opposite. We'll just work 30% less and spend this time on improving the bottlenecks. How do we get there when we're either a starting recruiter or somebody who has never used data or doesn't know how to get data out of your ATS, out of your... So how do you get started?
That's a fantastic question. Spreadsheets are free, right? If you track your own data, the ATS, you may have certain functionalities, but an ATS isn't designed to make recruiters better at recruitment. An ATS is designed to securely store and process a candidate, right? So there isn't really a recruitment tool for a recruiter that's designed to help them empower themselves with data. So you have to create your own tool. It doesn't have to be hard. Just track what you do. Get a spreadsheet together. Have a weekly role, and then have your process as columns. So outreach, screens, interviews, what have you, and just have a look at the data over a period of say 12 weeks, and say to yourself in a retrospective manner, like, okay, this many screens got me that many interviews. What is that a good use of my time? Why wasn't it higher? Why wasn't it lower? Is this a valuable step based on what I've seen? So the best thing you can do is to just learn a little bit from your own data, because as you work, you are generating data. So you may as well learn from that. If you want to learn anything around the basics of recruitment operations, obviously follow me on LinkedIn. Have a look at, I'll be publishing articles on this over the course of the year. I also recommend if you work for a tech company, it sounds a little bit out of left field, go speak to a DevOps engineer. Everything that we're talking about here, they've been doing for 20 years. Go to a DevOps meetup and understand how they think about the process of removing bottlenecks in a different process and see how they align, see if there's any similarities. So that's always fun because they're a very passionate group of people, our DevOps engineers. And lastly, if you're interested in understanding the concepts like the more lean and the theory of constraints, and you just want to understand that in a bit more of an overall sense, there are a few books that are really useful as well. There's a chap called Eli Goldratt who wrote a book called The Goal, which is actually a fictional account. It's not non-fiction, it's fiction. So it's very easy to read through. And it's just the story of a someone who runs a factory and sort of the paradigm shift towards that data-driven way of working. And there's an additional book that is focused on DevOps, which is a kind of a copy of that book called The Phoenix Project, which again is about an IT manager who is in the middle of this paradigm shift towards this more data-driven way of releasing software. And in my view, we said yesterday that recruitment hasn't had that Phoenix Project moment yet. So I think it's really cool that a whole new generation of recruiters are going to be doing that. So if you want to get into the Rec Ops stuff, I'm more than feel free to follow me on LinkedIn and hit me up on a DM if you've got any questions. Just look at your own data and just start tracking and learning from yourself. And go speak to a DevOps engineer if you've got the time.
I found both books. So the first one is The Goal, a process of ongoing improvements. The writer, and it's so I'll send the link in the description because the writer is Eliyahu M. Goldratt, not easy to spell. So I'll put the link.
I think he goes by Eli for obvious reasons.
Yeah, Eli. Yeah. And the second book is The Phoenix Project, a novel about IT, DevOps, and helping your business win, by Jeannie Kim. And I'll put those links. Great. And so how about writing the book for recruiting, Luke?
Well, I'll have to work on my writing skills. My narrative skills aren't too good, but that's what I'm hoping to do. Yeah, maybe we can do it as a group together. We can figure out what works from these processes. And
there's a book called Who Took My Cheese? And the person made an adaptation, Who Took My Talent? I have to find this. It's for recruiting, is about an evolving role, evolving changes in recruiting. I'll find it. It's a PDF. Anyway, if I find it, I put the link in the description as well. Got it. So track everything, use spreadsheets. So I didn't want to say anything when you said ADS is all not built to help recruiters get better at recruiting. That's actually, I agree with you. And that's also why we built HireSuite CRM. So that's just the casual push for our own product, but we do some of those metrics in the product as well. Spreadsheets, recruiters have a lot of spreadsheets. What you're saying is you should be tracking the processes. So just pass-through rates between each stages. And that's a very good start. We talked a lot about bottlenecks as well and capacity. How do you track this? Do you have any good, because I think pass-through rates are getting more mainstream, so people are aware that at least they should be tracking pass-through rates from first candidate engaged to the hire. But capacity, that's more novel. People less used to this. So how do you measure and track capacity?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're absolutely right. Volume and pass-through is becoming more mainstream, which is excellent, but it is late 2/3 of a whole. And capacity, whether we measure it or not, is still a thing. It still exists. So not measuring it doesn't mean it goes away. Now, is there an easy way? No, because each step, there could be an automated step, for instance, like a tech test. That essentially has an infinite capacity, right? So we don't have to really worry about those. So where are the capacity measurements where the bottlenecks tend to live? Well, that tend to be people-centric bottlenecks, right? People only have a certain amount of time. So a good way to measure this is by having your interviewers, rather than ad hoc, going backwards and forwards, scheduling interviews, have them commit to a specific number of slots. And what that allows you to do is be much more systematic with scheduling. Your tier coordinators will thank you because it cuts down a lot of chatter between parties involved, the coordinators, the candidate, and the hiring manager or interviewer. But what it does mean is that you can measure capacities because you can measure slots. And you can do something simple like measure the volume booked in a week, not the volume done, the volume booked in a week against the capacity in a week, and have that on a graph. So you have a time series, and if the booked goes above the number goes above the slot number, then there's your bottleneck. So there are ways of measuring. And then if you want to get into some fancy stuff, you can attach WIP limits and various other things and certain SLAs that make sure you stay within that range. But I think that's probably for another podcast. But I would recommend measuring capacity like that. Like, save yourself a lot of effort by forward thinking and actually booking in slots. And that way you can ask for more slots. It's more of a tangible concept, an interview slot, than saying, oh, can I have a bit more of this person's time? You can go to your leadership and say, 4 slots isn't enough. We need 2 more slots. Where do we get the 2 slots? Okay, that's easier to think about. That's an easier problem to solve. Maybe 2 interviewers can do 1 more slot each. Maybe we can get 1 interviewer to come in extra and do 2 slots. So I would recommend forward booking interview slots. And again, if you have any pushback from leadership around the use of interviewers' time or potential redundancy, well, we've always got the data, right? We can prove how much volume we produce week on week, and we can use that to decide the initial number of slots.
So we can. That's something that should be embedded in the kickoff meeting. We'll be looking for that job. How many interview slots are you committed to give me every week? And even maybe go as far as to define that will be on Thursday, 6 p.m. or just have the actual thing so the person is not able to move them. That's a good thing. That's a good one. And there is another big bottleneck that I see. It's the resume review or candidates review. So we're able to produce a shortlist. What did you think of those people? Let me get back to you. And then 1 week later, just following up, did you have a look at those people? Let me get back to you. And then 1 week later, the number 1 is great. Yeah, but she found a job in between. So how do you get the commitment for people to review the resumes? Should it be a time slot as well during the week?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I find that it's useful to measure the interest of the hiring manager and will they actually prioritize this role. You go into a kickoff meeting and you ask about the priority. Has any hiring manager ever said this isn't a high priority? They don't want this candidate yesterday. But if you actually put some pressure on their calendar, you need to fill out. You need to review X many candidates in a week. Then you start to test whether this really is a priority or not. So it is a good early measure of whether you have a stakeholder engagement problem. But when it comes, I don't think slots are useful for something like this. I just think a good kickoff meeting with a hiring manager, having them understand the importance of the hiring velocity. And again, we can use the data. How many of these people are we likely to produce from our effort? We can calculate this if we measure volume and pass through. So there's no point keeping this to ourselves. We can go to our hiring manager and say, we're likely to be sending you 6 candidates per week, and we need you to spend minimum of 5 minutes looking at their CV, reading my notes thoroughly, maybe checking them out on LinkedIn or GitHub or any other third parties that they put in their application. Do you have time to do that? Because if you do not, then do you have a proxy who can do that for you? Maybe a tech lead or an engineer that's looking for a stretch target. But if we can be mindful of that, rather than waiting for the problem to occur, we can use that data to forecast what we need from our hiring manager, set expectations super, super, super well, and go from there. And of course, if the problem still persists, we can communicate the impact of that problem. Because if it's just an impact to the recruiter and it's not a high priority, why should they care? Whereas you can say, this is increasing the level of effort for this role. We're going to need 5 or 6 tech interviews at this stage just to make one hire, and the average is 4 across the business. times that by 250, that's 500 hours of engineering time you're wasting the business by just not doing what you said you would do in the first place. Well, all of a sudden, this is a business problem now. This is something that they really should be accountable for. 500 hours of engineering time, that's a lot. So you can see how, again, if you have the data at your disposal and you understand how it links up, you can start relating it to them. You can start relating it to the business, and the higher managers tend to wake up a little bit when you say that.
There's so much to unpack here, and I just really want to focus on what you just said. So there's two very interesting things that I noted. The first one is embed the capacity planning in the kickoff meeting. Um, that's very important, and it will also make you more legit and build more trust because you're now on par with them. We're just not delivering, you're not taking orders, but we're your partner. So that's very important to set up the expectations from the first early meeting. We can give you 6 people per week. You'll probably need to review those resumes and give me a feedback within 24 hours. Can you do this? Can you commit to do this every time and get an early commitment? That's also like sales and project management tactics. You want to have your counterparts commitment and not just give them things like we will do this and we'll see later. No, you want them committed. So that's the first one. The second one is it's not a recruiting problem, it's a company problem, it's a business problem. And too many recruiters don't think enough about the biggest impact of like mishires or slowdown in the recruiting process. It's not so much your problem as it is the company's problem. And I think that the way that you explained it made it very obvious for the company, and that's also the good way to talk to your exec team and to the management. This is not my problem because if I come with a problem that's mine, nobody will care. This is our problem, and it's a company problem because if we don't do this, if people don't review resumes fast enough, then we are suddenly losing 500 hours, or I don't know what was the math, but 500 hours of engineering time per year. So that's maybe a full-time engineer that's just wasted because we're not fast enough. So that's a very good point. My last question, because we're almost at the end of the time of this great masterclass on recruiting ops 101. Last question is another question that I get all the time is what are the average number that you're seeing in the markets, so that I can compare to those numbers? Because when you start tracking numbers, it's very difficult to have comparables. I guess in manufacturing, you know that you're able to do that type of component in X amount of time with X% of defects. So extending that question to you, do you have average numbers that you can share on whether, I don't know, like the, number of outreaches per week, conversion to the outreaches, number of interviews booked per week per recruiter, the capacity, how many, like, on those main KPIs that you mentioned, do you have average numbers or ballparks that you can share?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my business is very specific to a very specific market, which is hyperscale tech business, mainly in Europe, a little bit in North America. So it could be vastly different depending on the sector and whatnot. But let's look at the top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel, which is a bit more specific, like a bit more standard, right? I'm outreach to screen, or should I say outreach to sourced screen. There's another thing, people sometimes mush all of the applicants together and get the wrong conversion. So outreach to sourced screen. Before the economic downturn, I saw between 8 and 12% for technical professionals in and around Europe. So that's people who want to get on the phone, speak to our recruiters. So 100 outreach, it's going to get you 8 to 12 screens, depending on what your message was like. Since the downturn, I've seen that chopped in half. I've seen about 6% going up to 8% for some roles, because I think a lot of people are hearing a lot about the layoffs, and they're holding a bit, that they're not looking. They're actively staying where they are for now. That is absolutely my opinion based on what I've seen. But lastly, you mentioned about looking for comparables. One point on that is that the amount of data that recruiters generate in a business is an order of magnitude higher than what your sales team generate. but how much insight does the business expend? How much resources does the business expend pulling insight from the sales data? So if you're looking for comparables within the business, or if you're an agency recruiter, if you start tracking your data now, in a year's time, you will have so much data on all of your roles that you will have your own comparables. You will be able to measure a JavaScript script engineer conversion rate compared to a Java engineer conversion rate, or a project manager now compared to a project manager in Q1. So it is worth tracking, because you'll be amazed how fast that data accumulates. And then you will have, the longer you do it, the more efficacy the data has. So I just want to make one more point on that, is that, you can use the power of your own data to really to kind of marshal a lot of insights in that regard.
All right. So it's not so much about comparing with other companies, but rather comparing to yourself. And that's also like a continuous improvement advice. Same for manufacturing, customer success. You don't want to be comparing your numbers to other teams, because no team is the same, but to yourself. And the goal is not to be better than this other team, but to be better than yourself 3 to 6 months ago, right?
Yeah, well, you're always starting from where you currently are. So you could say, "Oh, I want to do it the way Nike does it," or "I want to do it the way my competitor does it." But you're always starting from where you are. So you really need an iterative mindset in order to genuinely, as you say, continuously improve.
Got it. Thanks a lot for your time and your learning, Luke. I hope we're getting closer to that Phoenix project moment in recruiting, thanks to those 30 minutes. So thanks for taking part.
It's been a pleasure.